Hey friends, how's it going? My name is Gabby, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing my 2022 reading survey. And this is one of my favorite videos to make at the end of every year because these questions just ask a bunch of different questions about the books that you read throughout the year. I feel like these questions are really fun and really unique, you know, because I get to talk about books that lived up to the hype, books that made me laugh, books that made me cry. It's just like a really cool way to wrap up the whole year. And I have done this video for a number of years now. Like, I've done so many years of this style of video. So if this is something you'd like to see more from me, I will have all of the previous years that I've done this linked down below, so you can go and check those out. But yeah, let's just jump right into the questions because there are quite a bit. The first question is going to be, how many books did you read this year? And at the time that I'm filming this, I'm not exactly totally done with my reading plans for this year, but right now I'm sitting at about 224, 225, which is the most that I've ever been able to read in one year. I think that's mainly due to the fact that I was reading a lot of manga this year. Manga was something that I got into that I was not expecting to get into, and so that definitely contributed to how much I was able to read this year, which is so exciting. I've never read more than 200 books in one year, so that is an amazing thing for me. The next question is the most read genre, and for this question, you know, I was really curious myself which genre was going to take the cake because I read a lot of thrillers, I read a lot of horror, and I read a lot of romance. Like, those are my top three genres for sure, but thriller ended up winning by quite a bit. The next question is the longest and the shortest book that you read this year. The longest book that I read this year was Battle Royale at 656 pages, which I do feel like is a pretty long book, but not nearly as long as some of the books that I've read in past years. And then the shortest book that I read this year was actually Petrified Women, which was only 92 pages. And I think that this is so awesome because both of these actually ended up being some of my favorite things that I read this year. And it also just so happened to be the longest and shortest things that I read this year. And then the next question is your favorite book that was published in the year of 2022. And this is obviously so hard because most of the books that I'm reading are new releases. Like, I've noticed with my reading taste, I just love to pick up the new releases that are coming out. And so most of the books that I did read this year did publish this year, but I think two of my top favorite books that came out this year, it would be no surprise if you just watched my best books of the year video, that Notes on an Execution and We Spread were definitely my top two favorite books that I read this year, and both of these were published this year. I think Notes on an Execution published in January or February this year, and then We Spread actually just came out, I want to say in August, maybe September. Both of these books had such a major impact on me and were some of my favorites that I read this year, and I highly recommend both. Alright, the next question is your favorite debut of 2022, and this is another question that I just really love because I feel like oftentimes I won't even realize that a book is a debut from an author until I go to look them up and see what other books they've published, and there's nothing, and I'm like, wow, that was a debut, like that was really solid. Like, for example, that happened with Lease on Love by Fallon Ballard. This is a romance book that ended up in my top 15 of the year. I loved it so freaking much, and I didn't realize at the time that I read this that this was actually this author's debut. And what's exciting is that they actually do have another romance book publishing early next year, so like, you bet your ass I'm gonna be reading that book. But also Pen Pal, shockingly, is a debut. I did see that this author does have another book published, so I'm interested in checking it out. And then also, most recently, Sign Here was actually really fun, really incredible. I cannot believe that this book was a debut. Like, this book was so original, so unique, and so fun. So I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye out for Claudia Lux in the future to see what she's going to be writing in the future because this was so fun. Next question is, what is your favorite book that you read for the first time this year, but it was not published in the year of 2022? And this is another one that I struggle with because I have so many different answers for this, but I would definitely say Battle Royale is among the top of the top for me for books that were not published this year. I mean, this one came out in like 1999, I'm pretty sure, and I think it's incredible that it still holds up as well as it does even 20 years later. Like, this book is so freaking fantastic. But then I would also say the nonfiction book Wild is one that I read for the first time this year that is just absolutely top tier for me. And then also The Shuddering by Anya Alborn is another horror book that came out a number of years ago that I read for the first time this year and I absolutely loved. And then the next question is one that I also love because it says a book that lived up to the hype. And a book that I think absolutely 100% lived up to the hype for me is Beach Read by Emily Henry. I know this book didn't work for everyone, and maybe this book got a little bit overhyped for some people, but for me, this was everything and more that I was hoping this book would be. Nora is probably one of the most relatable protagonists I've read in such a long time, and you know, after thinking about it more, I do think this is my favorite that Emily Henry's come out with so far. I mean, it was either this one or People We Meet on Vacation. Like, those are definitely my top two from Emily Henry, but this book was just everything, and I can't wait to read Emily Henry's new release in 2023. Oh my gosh. And then of course, following up that question, we have a book that did not live up to the hype. And for me, sadly, that's gonna be Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, because this is a book that was just so hyped this year, you know, because it won the Book of the Month, Book of the Year award, it won the Fiction award on Goodreads, and I had just seen so many friends, like so many friends giving this 5 stars, and I was just convinced that this was gonna be something that I would love. And I just feel like this one, personally for me, didn't live up to that hype. I feel like I ended up giving this book 3 stars, and it was just fine for me. And I feel like maybe if I had jumped into this book not really knowing anything about it, maybe I could have enjoyed it more, but I think the hype surrounding this book really made me think it was going to be something I would love, and so maybe I just went into this one with too high of expectations. But I also just understand that this book is just not exactly my taste in books anymore, and that's probably definitely more of a me thing than any fault of the book. But yeah, I just feel like this was a little bit overhyped for me this year, and that sucks. Alright, the next question is a book that felt like the biggest accomplishment to read, and I do love this question because I feel like oftentimes you would associate the longest book with a book that feels like the biggest accomplishment to read, and in a lot of ways I do feel like that about this book, just because this book is, you know, 650 pages, and I was reading along with the audiobook for this book, and what I found to be really difficult is that the audiobook was slightly different than the written text in here, and I think it was because of the translation and because there's been different versions of this book published, so I had a different version of the audiobook than the writing in this physical book. So actually using the audiobook and trying to follow along in this book was actually kind of difficult, because the author in the book would use like first names or their last names, and then the audiobook narrator would use the opposite of what was in the text, so trying to follow along proved to be quite difficult. So I think for that reason, this book did feel like such an accomplishment to read. But also, I would say the book The Six also felt like a huge accomplishment for me to read this year, because this one's been on my TBR for so long. This was a book that I just randomly picked up when I went to Value Village one time. I just saw it and thought it sounded cool, and I just bought it, which I rarely ever do something like that. Like, I had never heard a single soul talk about this book before I bought it, and you know, when I finally read it, there was no audiobook for this book, so I read all of it with my eyeballs, which is pretty rare these days, especially for a book of this length. I'm pretty sure this one's like well over 400 pages, and so it just felt really good to finally read this book, to feel accomplished in reading it. Even though it only ended up being a 3-star book for me, I still felt so accomplished after I finished reading it. Alright, the next question is your favorite character that you read about this year. And you know, I read so many characters this year that were so fun and so incredible, and so many that I related to, and I feel like the characters that I end up loving the most are the ones that I relate to the most. So for those reasons, I think Nora from Book Lovers is definitely one of my favorite characters that I read about this year. Her love for her sister, and her love for like living in the city, and her love for like not really wanting a family and children, and you know, just kind of being an independent bad bitch. Like, I just loved her so much in this book. Another character I really loved is Joy from The Romantic Agenda, and this is mostly because Joy identifies as asexual, which is something that I also identify as, and for those reasons I found her to be so relatable in this book. And then most recently also the character Ellie from Kiss Her Once for Me. This character is demisexual and bisexual, and there was just so much about her that I related to. She's a Taylor Swift fan. Like, I just immediately connected with her character, and I felt so much for her character in this book. And then, you know, also just to mix it up, Robin from So Happy For You is also one of my favorite characters that I read about this year. She is definitely very extra. She's very bold. She's very, some would say, problematic. I just really freaking loved reading about her this year, and I feel like in some ways I did relate a lot to different things that she was bringing up and different conversations she was having with her friends. I don't know, she's definitely not a character that's going to be for everyone, but for me personally, she's got to be one of my favorite characters that I read this year. And then the next question is, who was your least favorite character that you read about this year? And this is another tough one, you know, because I read some truly frustrating characters this year, but I feel like Art Barbara from the Paul Bears Club, like, he's got to be at the top of that list, because he was just so pretentious and obnoxious, and I just, oh my god, he drove me nuts. And then also Andy in Pieces of Her by Karen Slaughter. This is another character that just kind of drove me absolutely fucking crazy while I was trying to read it, and honestly, both of these characters, I feel like they were the worst characters for me because they kind of ruined the stories for me. All right, the next question is going to be the most shocking book or moment that you had this year. I feel like for sure Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney had one of the most shocking moments in a book for me this year. Not just because of that, you know, total plot twist ending that I did not see coming, but also just because this book was really surprising with how much I loved it in general. But also, I would say The Perfect Child by Lucinda Berry definitely had some of the most shocking things in a book that I read this year. I was pretty disturbed my entire time reading this. I'm pretty sure my mouth was just hanging open in disgust for the entire last third of this book. And then the next question is going to be your favorite couple or your biggest OTP that you read about this year. And you know, once again, I gotta shout out Book Lovers with Emily Henry because, you know, Nora and Charlie in this book were so cute. But also Ellie and Jack in Kiss Her Once for Me definitely are one of my favorite couples that I read about this year. And then also in my favorite manga series, this romance is literally so cute. This is the Sweat and Soap manga series. I'm obsessed with this manga. I'm obsessed with this couple. They give me major Kath and Levi vibes from Fangirl, and I just love them together so freaking much. All right, and then the next question is going to be the best written books that you read all year. And I definitely think that Notes on an Execution is definitely one of the best written books that I've read this year. I feel like this is a book that is so gorgeously written. It's so thought-provoking, and it just makes you think a lot about different things, and I really love that. But I also would say Our Wives Under the Sea is a book that I very recently just read, and I feel like this one has got to be one of the best written books that I've read this year. Just the writing in general is really stunning. It's quite a slow burn, and there's not a whole lot that happens in this book if I'm being honest, but just the writing itself is so beautiful, so thought-provoking, and it's so lonely but lovely, and I just don't know how to explain it. It was so beautifully written. And then I love this question because it asks what is the book that you pushed the most people to read this year? And I feel like you would have a better idea of this than I would, but just based off of what I've been seeing getting tagged in and how people have told me they picked up a book because of me and they loved it, I feel like a lot of people picked up Pen Pal because of me this year, or at least that's what I noticed right around the time that I read this. A lot of people were tagging me that they finally got around to reading this because of me. I also did see quite a bit of friends picking up Battle Royale right after I had read it, and they let me know that they picked it up because of me. And then also most recently, I think We Spread. I feel like this is a book that I'm starting to push on everyone that I know. And I feel like there are a number of people who have reached out to me and let me know that they read this book because of me, which makes me happy because this is my favorite book that I read this year. So the more people that can read it because of me, the better. Ooh, this next question is fun because it's what is your favorite book cover from this year? And I honestly think The Family Game by Catherine Steadman might be my favorite book cover this year. I mean, look at this. It's stunning. I love this blue periwinkle purple of the background with this really cool mansion, and then the way the text is in this neon pink. This just really works for me. I feel like if this book didn't have this book cover, I would not be nearly as excited about this story as I am. I mean, the story's great obviously, but I would not have been as excited to pick it up and read it if it did not have this beautiful cover because I'm shallow. But also this cover is just stunning. It's top tier. I just love the combination of this blue color with the pink. It just really works for me. I think it's stunning. All right, the next question is your favorite adaptation. So this is any book that's been made into a TV show or movie or any kind of adaptation that you saw this year. I think my favorite would have to be Wild. I know the book and the movie came out quite some time ago, but I experienced both the book and the movie for the first time this year, and I think both the book and the movie were both so well done. I feel like this was such a freaking good adaptation. It was so true to the book. I love that the movie stars Reese Witherspoon, and it was also directed by Jean-Marc Vallée, who has recently passed away, unfortunately, in the last few years, which is so sad because he's such an incredible director. This movie is so stunning, and this movie just really speaks to me, and it gives me the same feeling that the book does, which I think is super important. But also, I have not yet seen the Battle Royale movie, but I've heard great things, so I'm really excited to watch this. And then also, Foe is currently being adapted into a movie right now as we speak, and the cast includes Saoirse Ronan, literally one of my favorite actresses. I cannot wait to see this movie. All right, the next question says, what book made you cry the most this year? And I don't think anyone would be surprised that We Spread by Ian Reid is in fact the book that made me cry the most this year. I actually have footage of me, bawling my eyes out after I finished reading this book. So if you missed that vlog, I'll have that link down below. But yeah, this book really impacted me emotionally in a way that not a lot of books have, so that was pretty cool. But I would also say for sure The Dead Romantics, which is really cool because I actually read that at the same time as We Spread. It was in the same reading vlog that I read both of these books. It was just a very emotional week because both of these books were so beautiful and so emotional. This is definitely the romance book that made me cry the most this year. And then also Heartstopper Volume 4. This one's definitely the most emotional in the series for me. This book was so beautiful. And then the next question says, which book made you laugh the most this year? year, and I definitely think So Happy For You made me laugh quite a bit this year. Like, this book was just so entertaining for me. But also, if I had to pick like more of a romance and a rom-com, I would say The Bodyguard really surprised me with how funny this book was. There were so many moments I was listening to this on audio and I would just crack up laughing because of how cute they were. All right, and the next question says, who is a new favorite author? Like, whether that's a newly published author or someone who's just a new favorite that you discovered this year. And I would definitely say Junji Ito, when it comes to horror manga, is definitely a new favorite author of mine. I can't wait to read more of his backlist. And then also, I'm definitely a new fan of Laurel Hightower. I read 2 of her horror short stories this year. Crossroads is definitely like one of my new favorite books of all time, and I did really enjoy Below is the other one that I read from her this year. That one was also pretty good, but I do love her writing style, and so I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye on this author in the future. And then also, Ian Reid just launched himself into like my top favorite authors, because only before this year I had read I'm Thinking of Ending Things, and I actually read that book twice and I do really like that book, but then both of these 2 books are like so top tier for me, and after reading We Spread, like I will literally read anything that he buys. Like, he's a new auto-buy author for me and I love his stuff. Like, seriously, Ian Reid is so unique. His books are so psychological and scary, but in the most like weird way. I just really love his writing. I think he's one of the best writers right now. And then the last question that I have on here is your favorite nonfiction book that you read this year, because I feel like even though I don't read that much nonfiction, I still like to have a moment to kind of highlight some of my favorite nonfiction that I read this year. And since I already talked extensively about Wild, let's talk about another nonfiction that I really loved, which was I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. I know everybody's talking about this book this year, but this book was just so special, and Jeanette McCurdy is just such an amazing writer. The way that she was able to be so vulnerable in sharing her experiences was just so touching, and I feel like this book just really impacted me. And then also the book We Were Dreamers by Simu. This was another memoir that I listened to this year on audio, and I'm just such a huge fan of Simu ever since I saw him in the Marvel movie Shang-Chi. He's just become one of those actors that I have my eye on. Like, he's gonna be in so many amazing upcoming movies. He's gonna be in the One True Love's Taylor Jenkins Reid adaptation, and he's gonna be in the Barbie movie. Like, there are just so many things in his career. I'm so excited for him, and he's just such a freaking genuine soft person, and this memoir was just so beautiful and it was everything. All right, so those are all of the books on my reading survey for this year. I'm so excited about this reading survey, and I feel like overall I have had such a great reading year. You'll have to let me know any of your answers to some of these questions, like what was the book that lived up to the hype for you the most this year? Or what was your favorite cover, or who is like a new favorite author that you just discovered this year? I would love to know. If you can let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye.